Hello, data enthusiasts. We are back again with another episode of High on Data. My name is Sunder Balakrishnan, and I head the supply chain analytics practice at LatentView. The word inventory is not just a piece of product, it's not just an asset in the asset liability statement either. For supply chain professionals and finance professionals, inventory is an emotion in itself. And a lot of times an inexplicable one of that. And so in this discussion, we are actually going to attempt the impossible. Right? We're going to try and find meaning and explanation to this myriad of emotions, to the method in this madness. And joining me for this conversation is someone who has seen it all, heard it all, felt it all when it comes to inventory, Mr. Sanjay Singh. Sanjay, thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful to have you here. First of all, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience for them to know you better.
Sure. Thanks, Sundar. And hello and a warm welcome to all of you on this conversation. I must say that in my career, there have been a number of times, Sundar, that I have been very emotional about inventory. So, um, so just kind of introducing myself, I have 30 plus years of experience in finance and strategy in roles at Procter and Gamble, which is the world's largest consumer products company, where I worked in division, region, country, CFO, chief financial officer roles for 20 plus years. I spent a couple of years at Abercrombie and Fitch. That was my retail brick and mortar experience. I led strategy for them. And then most recently, I was the chief financial officer for Qurate, which is QVC and HSN, which is a 13 billion revenue multi-category video commerce e-retailer. So kind of spanned CPG and retail, brick and mortar and e-commerce. And now I run finance and strategy consulting. And as you can imagine, both in CPG and in retail, the one thing that's been common is the emotion around inventory management. So I look forward to this discussion.
That is as diverse experiences can get, with inventory being the common thread across all those experiences. And I'm pretty sure, that as we start going into this topic, even the amount of time we have available might be less to cover inventory. So we'll sort of get right into it. I want to start with maybe making an observation and then also get your thoughts and opinion. I was assessing the recently concluded NRF 2024. A lot of interesting innovations, new plays that CPG and retail organizations were coming up with, right from omnichannel as a theme to everything there is a generative AI and investments in AI. Uh, as I was looking back, and I took a step back after the event, I was sort of assessing it further, and what I sensed was that a lot of organizations were getting ready for 2024, preparing themselves, but with a tad bit of a caution. They still want to see that the winds of the past have actually blown out, and then they're going full on. With a lot of the bullwhip from the last couple of years sort of easing off, right? And first of all, I'd love to see what your thoughts are, what your reading has been of sort of the state of the union, if you
Very similar. So I do agree that I think 2024, I think, is going to be the year when businesses are kind of returning to pre-pandemic normal, which means a return to the traditional focus on, consumer demand generation through innovation, things like mix improvement, and a focus on productivity across the value chain and inventory control or management. Um, there is one huge difference, though. I think even in the last 2 or 3 years, um, both in retail and in CPG, companies now have access to far more data, far bigger pieces of data, much more interconnected data sets that were simply not available before. And
will.
along with that, there is the immense computing power capability of things like AI to analyze the data and patterns. So that's a big difference. And I think, however, even though the data is there, the computing power is available, very few companies have yet been able to really leverage that to meaningfully improve inventory quality and productivity to drive growth. And most companies, I would say, are struggling. The best ones are leveraging it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most companies are still kind of finding their way around. But this is the year in which the focus on inventory management and control and productivity will become the center focus.
Interesting that generally with inventory conversations, when the word data comes in, the connectedness of the data, like you mentioned, is definitely something that comes up for a lot of organizations. As soon as they hear that there is one more data set to be integrated, that has its own vagaries and its own pains. But that sidebar aside, when we have observed what customers have been coming to us for, what kind of requests we've been getting, um, we always talk about this sort of a pendulum swing in the supply chain. There's one cycle of shortage, then there's another cycle of excess, and supply chains keep swinging from side to side. We have seen lot many more requests now in the last 6 months for, hey, I'm having an inventory excess problem. Can you figure out how to solve this for us? We've assessed this, and generally demand variability is a classic reason. External disruptions is a classic, a second reason. But the third big piece, like you just mentioned, is that inventory and what to do with this inventory. What are you seeing as things that people are maybe not focusing on, that maybe you'd like them to, adjust their compass to start looking at as things to explore?
Um, so it's hard to kind of come up with one kind of focus area. I will pick one that I have been in most conversations around.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Obviously, people have different pain points where inventory is concerned. The
Right.
one thing that I find very common, both at CPG and at retail, is around inventory visibility, or rather the lack of inventory visibility. And it really puzzles me because more data and more connected data is now available,
Yeah.
and yet inventory visibility is a challenge. Um, so, I mean, if you think about it, um, let's talk retail, and within retail, let's talk a case in point: apparel retail. Lead times in apparel retail could be as much as 18 to 24 months. So, for example, right now as we speak, planners and merchants in apparel companies or footwear companies are planning, for summer and fall of 2025. I mean, imagine the kind of inflexibility that entails, right? There is no room to react to fashion changes and trends. Um, a fashion retailer that I worked with was really struggling with demand because their lead times were like 2 years, or 1.5 to 2 years, and they had no capability to read trends and react. So they went to school to study fast fashion, where lead times are dramatically lower, could be 3 to 6 to 9 months. Um, and that's the norm in fast fashion. But now, not everybody wants to become fast fashion because that's not their business model, but
True.
they're able to learn how do you reduce lead times. And this company that I worked with was able to reduce their lead times dramatically down from 24 months to 12 months, and that for most items that needed it, like fashion items, for example, and that was transformational. So they are
True.
now able to dedicate about 20 to 25% of their entire open to buy to chase, to read and react to trends. And imagine what a powerful impact that is. They talk about it in their earnings calls. Their sales are up double digits, their inventory is lower and cleaner, the stock is up 5x. Um, Now, there are multiple capabilities needed that need to be in place, not just chase and lead time reduction. But that's just one example of how, the critical difference was gaining visibility
Mm.
into their vendors' inventory, and sometimes the vendors' inventory.
Yeah.
So that is kind of one thing around, I
If,
would say, inventory visibility.
if you don't mind, Sanjay, for our listeners who may not be familiar with Chase as a strategy, could you maybe spend a minute just to sort of, open the hood and explain that a little bit. That might be really helpful.
Sure. I'm sure the our retail friends here would be very well aware of Chase, but Chase is a concept where you do not allocate 100% of your inventory dollars open to buy to lines of products. You keep 20%, 15% or something available in your total inventory dollar investment, and then you read and react to design. So it could be a certain fabric design that could be trending. It could be a certain color or a certain cut that could be trending. And so based on that, you could make a call 6 months before the season that I think in this season or this summer, this particular trend is going to trend. And therefore, I want to dedicate X million dollars to go buy into that particular item. Now, you don't have to make this decision 24 months before, and keep that flexibility to chase into trends. That's what really chase is.
Amazing.
Um, yeah.
That's a lot of inventory working capital that you're having flexibility with. And I can also see that this sort of a investment strategy can be something that translates well to a couple of different categories where consumer trend shapes up a lot of fashion or fads. One is fashion apparel, of course. It can also be, say, toys as a category where different kinds of trends come in and go out. And I think electronics again is a category where trends come in and go out, and organizations could use this as a way to provide that flexibility. I love it. Love it.
And so that also, I mean, so think of CPG companies. So I worked for Procter and Gamble. I mean, we would have our innovations launch every season. So there would be seasonal scents, seasonal, for shampoos and for even for laundry. There are seasonal things that are coming in and out. The innovation that we planned was like, oh, we will have to, based on demand, we have a certain amount of, a particular scent or a flavor or packaging changes. You can read and react into that as well. So they don't. So CPG companies do not employ a chase mentality, but that is an increasing of a flexibility tool that can be employed to say, do not make your entire commitment upfront. Make only the base commitment upfront and leave 20-30% to chase into the trend, much closer to when you are about to launch your product. So that's another discipline. I think it's like you said, it translates into multiple. I mean, I'd say every industry.
Pretty much, yeah, yeah. Very interesting.
The second thing is that I have a lot of people talk about and is a pain point for many companies um, is flexibility. Not so much about visibility, but flexibility. Now, flexibility is not a new thing. Um, one of the again, I'll give you the example of this fashion retailer. One of the things that they realized is once they started looking into their vendor inventory and partnering with the vendor to say how much should you buy and how much should your vendor buy, they realized they had over the years over 1,000 different fabrics that they had asked their vendors to buy into based on design requirements. It could be a trill around a pocket, it could be a seam, it could be a certain buttons that you require. So all of these specialty designs ended up creating a lot of dollars of inventory clogged up at the vendor. And so they had lesser flexibility to chase into things or switch demand as needed. And it is just that interconnected data between the vendor, sometimes the vendor's vendor, when they got the full visibility, they said, okay, wow, we don't need to have these 1,000 specialty designs. And then they went to task and said, let's narrow down the menu to probably maybe about 100 to 150 different, fabrics required, um, without compromising the design elements. I mean, they could easily get to, all the design, the trims and the seams with a narrower inventory, and that then freed up a lot of inventory dollars at the vendor. So again, another example of flexibility of the inventory. Another flexibility is around brick and mortar stores. Um, Imagine the amount of inventory held at the center for feeding online demand and for feeding demand in the store. So the later you send inventory out or commit it to the stores, the better it is for you because you don't have to pull it back. And the same thing for returns. There are amazing algorithms, that sophisticated algorithms that people are using AI, that look at the physical store demand, look at online demand, look at proximate demand at a store location combined with their online demand, which then helps people, retailers, to optimize timing and quantity of inventory allocation pushed to stores or to outlet stores or kept centrally. Um, so I think this is another point that people kind of, a lot of companies really struggle with, even though best practices are available in helping the allocation algorithms. And finally, I would say, demand, no matter how good your inventory planning is, demand fluctuations will always be there, and they will always lead to excess inventory or shortages, like you were saying, Sundar. Reducing waste is a huge focus. In retail, this comes in the form of returns and processing, and liquidations and clearance and outlet strategies. In CPG, this comes as just simple, wastage. And so I think, again, the amount of data that is available now on all of these topics is just immense. And so the best companies are beginning to use these algorithms to figure out where is the waste happening, and how can we go after it in a systemic way and even on a real-time way, and help people, with management of the liquidations waste. So, I mean, I'd say, summing up, three things that I've been, people have been talking about: inventory visibility,
Mhm.
inventory flexibility, and inventory efficiency, in terms of, how do you minimize waste. So those are three things that I'm seeing people engage in.
I absolutely love it. So the framework, boils it down to three things: visibility, flexibility, and cost as the elements. And I think these have repercussions in so many parts of the network. Right from changing the way you provide flexibility can have an impact on capacity, procurement costs, overheads, productivity, and so many. I mean, you touched upon productivity right at the top. We're culminating it into these three pillars that probably are going to be the way ahead for organizations to really focus. I think let's start making it a little more actionable, right, Sanjay? Maybe let's start double clicking into each of these. Practitioners who are listening to us, consultants who are listening to us, industry people, I'm sure they'd love to know what within visibility, what within flexibility, and what within sort of this cost optimization are those best practices that maybe I know that we'll not be able to cover everything in this session, but at least we'll be able to provide some direction or guidance on what are those areas of focus within each that we could spend time on.
Okay, let's try that. It is hard because it's such a huge area.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll give kind of snippets, and I think I like your idea of best practices, because each of these, I mean, these are not new things, right? So, but getting all of these done, or flowing with the pain point, is this, I think that's the important discussion. So around inventory visibility, think of it kind of up the chain and down the chain. So if you think about a CPG company, for example. Um, Consumer products companies, some of the alcohol and beverage companies, they have access to, and they are working on data of inventory visibility up the chain. So you could be distributing through direct store distributors, you could be distributing to mom and pop stores, into big retailers like Amazon, Walmarts, and Targets, gaining more and more inventory visibility up the chain. It is now common, or there are best practices around partnering with retailers. If you're a category captain, or if you're a category innovator at a retailer, partnering with the retailer to get access to um, inventory data at the distributor and the retailer, and even getting offtake data. And that then helps with things like stockouts, being able to pan out the entire supply chain and understand where are the stockouts happening, what can we do, how can we react more real time to avoid more and more stockouts, and to keep real time inventory flow. Same thing with trade inventory. So I will talk about an example on how much inventory do you have in the trade. Um, There are companies that have made this a critical part of their sales and operation planning, the S&OP process. Not only do you look at how much inventory do you have, but you also look at the inventory that your larger retailers have. And if you want to make it a broader, I mean, looking at Nielsen and IRI data to understand how much inventory is sitting in the trade, that is a critical input in the S&OP process. Not everyone does it. There are tools and methods available to do it, but the best companies will do it. These are the best practices from a visibility point of view. Visibility down the chain for retailers would mean looking at your partnering with your vendors to understand how much inventory do they have, how much obviously is coming on the ships to you, on the ships or trains or cars or whatever, but also inventory sitting at the vendor. And sometimes you may even want to go one step lower to understand if you have a critical supply chain element or a raw material or a particular fabric. You may need to even go a step lower into vendor inventory, and that then becomes a part of their S&OP planning process. So again, down the chain and up the chain, visibility of inventory, there are best practices around that. How do you partner with people? How do you systemically bring that information in, not once a year, not once a quarter, monthly, even weekly, or maybe even daily? Around flexibility, I would say just the idea of inventory planning or placement and allocation. So think of a brick and mortar store. Um, you know, when do you push out timing of the allocation to the stores or to the outlet stores, and inventory placement? There are powerful algorithms that take into account your demand, seasonality, your vendor supply chain logistics information that take into account even your initiative. So you have a store a front that has been renovated or a marketing program going on, and based and reading and reacting to that in real time, and then informing your placement and allocation algorithms. Those are best practices that people employ for inventory allocations. Again, the best in class folks do that. So if you have a problem with how much of inventory is stuck out in the stores in the timing of allocation, think of this best practice. One of my favorites is sales and operation planning. There are multiple processes both in CPG and in retail. There is S&OP, which is sales and operation planning. There is the open to buy or the MFP, merchandising financial planning process. And then there are best practices like having a chase strategy. Uh, uh, so companies like Procter and Gamble believe heavily in sales and operations planning. CPG does it. In fact, early on in my career, I realized some of the best companies employ their best people as master planners in S&OP, getting that connection between demand and inventory and vendor inventory, and that making that machine kind of talk to each other and getting the different parts of the company to speak to each other on a regular basis and keeping that live. It's a massive capability. Very few companies have this, and in retail, I'm sorry to say, very few people employ this. The large successful retailers do employ S&OP. They do a great job of merchandising financial planning and open to buy, but the S&OP that sits above that makes people talk to each other, that is not as robust in retail generally. There are best practices around build to order versus assemble to order, keeping the flexibility in your systems. I talked about Chase. So I think these are some of the best practices around inventory flexibility. Then switching to kind of efficiency or cost optimization. There is a whole best practice that sits around liquidation management program. Again, there is so much data now available on returns, returns and wastage and obsolescence from a demand point of view, and your history point of view, that there are powerful algorithms that can be employed to understand, oh, when I run this particular program, here's the kind of return I should expect. Or if I have this kind of an innovation coming in, this is the kind of return or wastage I should be expecting. Again, a lot of data available and best practices around returns and waste management. I mean, think of retailers. many people are beginning to kind of rethink their outlet strategy. Is an outlet only meant for kind of liquidation, or is an outlet a part of their strategy? I mean, are they employing a second line, or a different line of either more premium or more affordable line of clothing or shoes? Do they want to use outlet for that? And what is the balance? How much of your outlet store should be liquidation versus lines that are dedicated for outlet stores? These are all, there are best practices available in trying
Mhm.
to understand what is best for you. It just doesn't mean that you have to copy somebody else's outlet
Exactly.
strategy, but what is best
Yeah.
for you.
Interesting.
Let me stop there. I think those are kind of the examples, best practice. I mean, there are many more, but I think just
Right.
think of the framework of visibility, flexibility, and efficiency, and think
Mm.
of these granular elements within that, and go to the one where the pain point is.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Uh, a couple of things that are sort of coming out of this for me. One is that I think it's not too far away where visibility is going to become table stakes for most organizations. That's like the baseline for operations is. I mean, flexibility is something you'll further go on to build on top of it, but without that baseline visibility, you're perennially going to be struggling. You're perennially going to be chasing the chase, if you will. I think the second part of it, when I zoom out and sort of think about what you just mentioned, there are two elements that are coming out for me. One is connections. Everything in the supply chain, something moves and something else shakes. Establishing those relationships or connections is going to be fundamental. And then driving collaboration out of that is going to be the other value. And I think that's where you spoke about a systemic view or a systemic approach to solving this, where AI can actually come into play. When I think about the role of AI and what it can do for organizations to establish this connection, this collaboration, I think of it as almost in terms of a maturity curve.
Mhm.
One is getting that baseline data in place. And you mentioned a lot of organizations have started getting this data in. They're figuring out how to shape it. The more mature ones have figured out how to shape it. A lot of them are already working on that end-to-end visibility problem, getting that table stakes right. But I think that's where the problem solving actually starts. From there, you try to figure out why are things going wrong, when are they likely to go wrong next, and when it happens, what's that recommended action? Is that maturity curve that organizations need to, go on? Uh, right from say something like retailer data being available live, you have an opportunity to now figure out where the hotspots are, but you also have an opportunity to figure out through AI where in your network is there an imbalance, right? Somewhere there's a demand, but there's a shortage because the supply is sitting somewhere else. And why did you get there? But before you figure out why you got there, can you address it immediately and then go back to the
Right.
question why? Those are sort of some use cases of AI that I have seen in solving the inventory problem. I'd like to again open it up, and I know we have a little time here left, but I'd like to open it up to see, are there one or two interesting use cases you have seen where application of AI has been like, oh wow, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, so there are some. I think AI is something that has been going on for years, even though the big noise is happening now.
Now,
Um, so I think so. A couple of things. I mean, I think the use of AI in detecting um, patterns around wastage. As I said, I mean, inventory wastage. Where in the chain is do you have markers where you can start predicting inventory wastage? So that is one application that I think has been in practice, but I think more and more people are kind of beginning to use that now,
yeah,
looking at the entire end-to-end chain and saying what are the systemic reasons where wastage could be in terms of either returns, or it could be in terms of I bought so many more pieces of design, and when do I know based on my demand that this is that I will have inventory left over, so I can push it out to my outlet store or run a liquidation program before it gets too late in the season, not wait for the next season, right?
sorry to interrupt me, but just that very problem that you just mentioned, we are speaking to a customer, a CPG company. This is a $150 million size problem for them, just based on initial estimates of
Not
inventory wastage.
surprised.
And there are two approaches that we are attempting. One is an AI approach, the other is a process mining approach as well, and a combination, a hybrid, to see we are able to map the process and then apply algorithms to understand why our waste is happening. But I just thought I'll share that. But please do continue with you could share another
No,
example.
I think that is great, because a lot of companies exactly doing what you're saying.
Mm.
Uh, think of the other aspect of it, right? What about stockouts? I mean, so now there is data available for a CPG company to work with a retailer. If you're the category captain, you have the data on a daily on
Yeah,
offtake. And imagine you are planning an initiative, an innovation, a new line of shampoo or new line of laundry or whatever, and you're monitoring it on a monitoring the amount of inventory that you have pushed out to the retailer, but also at the retailer, what is the offtake trend that's happening by SKU or by for that particular initiative and the base business, and then being able to read and react to that so that you avoid stockouts. That
mm,
data set, just that integration, that like you were saying, the connection of that is a huge, I would say, a breakthrough in how CPG and retailers are partnering to reduce stockouts, which is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for both the retailer and the CPG company. Huge. Wouldn't have
yeah,
been possible without the computing power of AI. That's another example. Now, I was just saying, I mean, how many times in our, our working life have we talked about, you know, the pitfalls,
yeah,
that you can avoid because you have AI and you have data sets now. So things like, if think about, how many times have you heard about, oh, there is an inventory reduction mandate. We have to
yeah,
reduce our inventory by 20%,
yeah,
right? Just because the cash flow is needed, the stock is down, or whatever. But the pitfall is, if you try to force it down without necessarily the other supporting systems around inventory visibility and flexibility, that's a disaster.
yeah,
On the flips, how many times have you heard, oh, we have to go for X% increase, growth in sales, so write me a check of X million dollars because I need to have a larger open to buy because I want to go and chase this inventory. Without the supporting systems, which now are possible with the help of AI and data, and that could be a disaster. 2 quarters later, you could be sitting on a stockpile that doesn't move, and then your stock could be even lower. Again, changes in liquidations and return policies without considering the inventory handling impacts, huge investments made in warehousing, logistics, or even systems infrastructure without necessarily evaluating the entire system and saying, what are the supporting systems that need to be in place for this investment to actually pan out? I think your point about thinking from a systemic point of view is critical.
mm,
And these kind of top-down mandates have to be thought on a more systemic level
yeah.
to avoid these pitfalls.
I think we started off with this. We're sort of going to end it with this, that supply chains are forever an oscillating pendulum, like you just said. On the one side is stockouts, on the other side is an excess of inventory. A good, connected, collaborative supply chain will help you operate sort of in that middle green zone, if you will. And the objective that you're always working towards is flexibility, visibility, and of course efficiency and costs. Sanjay, I really like to appreciate and thank you for taking the time for sharing your knowledge and wisdom in this space. I'd again like to open it up to the audiences to say that we again thank you also for spending your time with us. I hope this discussion was fruitful to you. We would love to hear back from you on, you know do go back, read about these topics, enhance your knowledge about these, and of course, if you think that any of these topics are worth spending more time on, do write back to us, and Sanjay and I would love to get back together to talk inventory again. Once again, thank you so much. Thanks, Sanjay, again, and look forward to the next time.
Thanks, Sundar. It was a pleasure. Hopefully, you guys all enjoyed the discussion, and let us know how we can help you in your journey.